Hey guys! So today we're going to be doing an in-depth analysis and interpretations of A Poison Tree. So this is going to be like an annotate with me. We're going to go through the poem together. And this poem is a little bit special because it was actually requested from one of you guys. So this poem is actually super simple. So we're actually not going to be doing a shorter version of this. And later this week I'm going to go back to the original Power and Conflict poems. But yeah, if you guys have any more requests, let me know and I'll work on it as soon as. Okay, so let's jump straight in. So, a super rough overview is that the narrator talks about the impacts of holding on to your anger and the consequences it may have. So, within this poem, we see like two direct contrasts. We see the narrator actually talking about how he was angry with a friend, however, his communication and the way he went about it kind of allowed him to let go of his anger. And then, in contrast to that, we see him being angry with an enemy, and then also the impacts that it has because he doesn't communicate. Ultimately, his lack of communication does have consequences, and this is something that we're definitely going to explore. So it's a really simple poem which kind of demonstrates the complexity of human emotions and why we react to certain things and the consequences it may have. In terms of the context, it was written in 1793 and it comes from a collection of poems called Songs of Experience. So this entire actual set of poems aimed to demonstrate the complexity of humans and their emotions, which is a recurring theme throughout the poem. Okay, so in terms of the structure, there are 4 stanzas, and each stanza actually has 4 lines, which makes it a quatrain. A quatrain poem, as just mentioned, is a poem that has 4 lines in each stanza, and it's a very, very simple type of poem. So there's 2 interpretations that Blake may have had when choosing to write it as a quatrain. One is that it could symbolize the deceivingly simple nature of man. However, another poem is that it might actually be ironic because even though the poem is quite simple, the actual emotion and the complexity of men is way more complicated. It also has a regular rhyming scheme of A, A, B, B, and what this does is that it creates a nice easy flow and it's easy to follow. So in terms of the themes, we definitely explore the power of emotions, especially anger. So we see the narrator being angry at 2 separate points and then they both have individual impacts. We see him being angry with his friend and then letting go and then being happy and at peace. And then we see him being angry with his enemy and then holding on to it and then the consequences that may have had. We also see the power of man because ultimately we are in charge of our own emotions, and then we kind of explore how the narrator takes control of his anger and then the consequences it has because of his actions and because of his own power. Okay, so let's move on to the poem. So as always, if you haven't read it, please just pause the screen, take a second, and then we're going to jump in with our analysis. Okay, so one thing we definitely can notice straight away is that the use of pronouns, which I. What this does, it really brings the reader closer to the poem and also the emotions. This is because like emotions and especially anger is something that we can all relate to, and so we can almost see ourselves as the narrator in this poem also. The narrator also uses a lot of pronouns, like possessive pronouns such as my, which kind of demonstrates that the anger does belong to him and he's aware that he is in control. Okay, so let's read the first 2 lines. I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did end. And what this is basically a metaphor, and he's saying that he confronted his emotions, which put an end to his anger, and he did this by communicating with it. He was able to let go of the anger easier because he was related to a friend. So we can assume because they were friends, because they were close, he was more comfortable in communicating his emotions, and because he did so, he was able to let it go. And this contrasts directly with the next 2 lines. So the next 2 lines are, I was angry with my foe, and I told it not, and my wrath did grow. So a foe is basically an enemy, and this is like an opposite to a friend. And what he did was, I told it not, my wrath did grow. So it shows a contrast here because he didn't talk about it. He didn't really acknowledge his emotions the same way he did with his friend. And because he didn't do so, his anger kept growing and he wasn't able to let go of it. So what this also does is it kind of symbolizes that it's a lot harder to forgive our enemies and to really talk through them because we don't have the same repertoire as we do with our friends. But now we're going to look at what actually happens when he doesn't let go of his anger and ultimately who it ends up hurting. The second stanza definitely explores exactly how he didn't really confront his emotions and basically like how he coped with his anger. The second line here, which says, night and morning with my tears, is a metaphor, and this demonstrates the extent to which it bothered him, which is like night and day, so it shows a consistency of him kind of building on this anger. But also like the tears kind of symbolizes how distraught he is, so it's quite a negative impact to him holding on to it. However, whilst this was kind of affecting him on the inside and it kind of resulted in his unhappiness, there is a contrast to how he was acting on the outside. So look at the use of imagery here with Sunday with smiles and soft deceitful wiles. And what he's actually doing here is he's using sarcastic expressions and trying to be fake and trying to act like everything's okay instead of actually communicating his anger. Now we know that he's angry at his foe and we know that he struggles to talk about it, and now we can look at the consequences that this is going to have. Okay, so moving on to the third stanza, we're going to see how this kind of anger manifests. So we see a metaphor here which is used to describe exactly how his anger has grown, and this is shown with the words grew and then bore an apple bright. So what it's basically saying is that he grew his anger and it manifested into a physical object for his foe who is actually going to consume this. So it creates an almost like poisonous apple. Also, look at the use of diction here. So diction is kind of like the words and vocabulary a writer can use to have a certain impact. And look at the use of the diction with bright. So is the apple bright and healthy because of all the energy invested into growing his anger? So that's definitely something you can ask yourself. Like, has the narrator reached a certain point in which, he's invested so much time and energy into this, which he wouldn't have actually had to do. And what he's done is he's kind of created this physical embodiment of his anger, which is a poisonous apple. So ultimately what happens is that his enemy kind of learns about his anger, and then look at the use of the lines, and he knew it was mine. So here symbolism is used to show that the foe finally learns about the anger that the narrator has been harboring all of this time, and now we're going to actually look at the consequences that it has. So we're at a position where the narrator has been harboring all these feelings, hasn't communicated it, it's manifested into a physical object, and now what's happened is that the foe actually learns about it, and then now we're going to talk about the consequences that it has. Okay, so let's go on to the fourth stanza, which basically shows the consequences of what happened, especially in the last two lines. So the lines read, "In the morning glad I see my foe outstretched beneath the tree." So my foe outstretched beneath the tree is actually, a metaphor for the anger of the narrator eventually killing his foe. So what he did was, after the foe found the poison apple, he actually consumed it, which is a metaphor for kind of taking up all the pent-up anger that the narrator had. And, we almost have to question is if this could actually have been avoided, if the death of the foe could have been avoided, if the narrator had just had better communication, as he did with his friend. So the narrator actually unleashing the anger onto his foe eventually basically killed him. However, in the second to last line, look at the use of the adjective glad. So we also have to question if the narrator is happy with the outcome. Like, is he happy that he finally was able to release all this anger and kind of like, tell his foe how he's feeling? Or was he actually with the fact that he could actually let go of his anger? So after it manifested, he kind of let go of it. So ultimately this poem actually does have a tragic ending, and we see the consequences of the narrator's action. Because he didn't communicate his anger with his foe as he did with his enemy, we allowed it to manifest into something that actually hurt his enemy, and in the end eventually killed him when he did release it. So in terms of key quotes, I definitely think we should go with "I told my wrath did end," which is basically a really simple sentence which uses a metaphor to show that speaking about his anger allowed him to let go of it. I think another one which is really important is "night and morning with my tears," and this is important because what it does, it shows that how long he manifested it and how long it was harboring these feelings. Finally, I would definitely try to remember "my foe outstretched beneath the tree," which demonstrates the consequences that the narrator had of holding on to his anger and ultimately killing his enemy. So yeah guys, that was a poison tree. I hope you enjoyed the analysis. If you have any more interpretations, as always, please leave them in the comments. And yeah, so ultimately, like, a poison tree is about the consequences of holding on to your anger versus, the consequences of letting go. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Please subscribe. Good luck with all your exams. And yeah, let me know how you guys found it. I'll speak to you guys soon.